Thanks, David. It's really good to be here. And I love the technology, I have to say. It's so simple to be able to be sitting down in Wellington in my office and deliver a webinar. That's fantastic. And I'm looking forward to doing so this morning. Just, I guess, little bit of background, guys, about how this came around um, and where it comes out of. And I'll talk more about that as we go through it. Um, many moons ago, when I was working for the financial industry complaint service across the ditch in Melbourne, one of our members was a bank, and we used to do all their life insurance claims for them, complaints that came out of the claims. And they contacted me one particular day and said, we're getting a lot of claim denials turning into complaints. Can you come and help us? So I did some research around what they were doing compared to what the outcomes were. And I started to come across some really interesting research that I then went a bit further into about the effects of what you say compared to what the person heard. So that's what we're kind of going to be talking about today. And there's a few aspects to it. And I'll explain those as we go through. So as usual, I've always gone on the internet and seen what I can do. I actually was speaking to Charlotte Lockhart the other day from Perpetual Guardian, and she told me that Andrew Barnes has this on his wall in his office. So I went and searched for it. Maybe not that picture. I'm only responsible for what I say, not what you understand. It's an interesting little sentence. I guess what I'm going to say to you today is let's turn that on its head, because yes, you're definitely responsible for what you say, but I think you also need to consider very, very carefully what they're understanding from what you're saying, particularly in a lot of circumstances of when you're giving advice, and that's really, really important. Well, let's just take a half a step back and talk about connecting with your customer. Many years ago, I was at a function with my lovely wife, and it was just one of those typical sort of meet and greet type of stand up for 90-minute type situations. And so I was chatting to people and, just generally networking, I guess, if you want to use that awful term. And at the end of it, we're heading home, and my wife said to me, "Can you tell me something?" And I said, "Sure, darling." She said, "Why is it that we go to these functions and you just connect with people? You get on with them, you chat to them, you get great information out of them, you deliver really good information to them. And I kind of stand over in the corner with my cheap glass of bubbles, kind of hoping that 90 minutes will rush past, knowing that I'm not going to get that back from my life." And I said, "Sorry, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, I just don't, I try, but I don't connect with people." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I don't know why." And she said, "Well, could you please find out? When you do, can you tell me?" So I did some research around it. It was fortuitous because at the time I was doing some studies, so it was a good thing to go and look at. And so this is the question that she posed to me. And I say this in just about every workshop I do. And the reason I talk about this, it really is the cornerstone of any negotiation and any interaction. And that is understanding why some people get on with others and others don't. In other words, sometimes we just click with people and sometimes we just don't. And we may never do, and or we have to work very hard to do it. So I started to look into this question of why that is. And when I pose this question in workshops, people come up with a very wide range of answers. They'll come up with things like because they smile. I have one cheeky guy say, because I'm good looking and I get on with good looking people. Another person said, "Oh, we talk about common ground. I like people that are honest. I get on with people that smile and shake hands and all that sort of thing." And all of those answers are right. But the way I've summed it up and what I found in my research is that we tend to like people like ourselves. Now, this is really important because if you have a think about somebody that you really like, I just about guarantee that you'll have some stuff, if not a lot of things in common. It could be where you live, it could be where you grew up, it could be where you come from, the football team, religion, politics, kids, age, whatever, sport. It could be a whole lot of things. We tend to like people like ourselves. Now, the amazing thing with that is when we are with people like ourselves, our communication pattern becomes completely different in that we don't have to go 1 + 2 is 3 in really simple terms, because we can just say simple things equals 3 and people understand it. I remember running a workshop once and I really wish I'd had my video a video camera with me because there was a couple of ladies sitting in the front who knew each other very well. And it was before the actual workshop started. And their conversation went something like this: "How was your weekend?" "Great." "And?" "Oh, fantastic." "Really?" "And that was that good?" "Yeah, it was great." Now, I had no idea what they were talking about, but they knew exactly what they were talking about because they were well connected with each other. They didn't need to say every single word to get their message through, and they were getting their message through. So the brilliance of connecting with your customer is that your communication becomes far more effective and efficient. And that's so very, very important when we're talking about advice for obvious reasons. I'm not going to go into why you do it. It's quite obvious around disclosure and making sure the information gets through. So that's the cornerstone. We tend to like people like ourselves. So how do we do that? Because again, we walk into that room and we go, okay, we tend to like people like ourselves, and we start looking around and thinking, well, hang on, there's no 60-year-olds with a beard who enjoys watching the Australian Rugby Union sitting in the room at the moment. So how am I going to find somebody good on it? Well, what we do is we use the technique of matching. Now, because we're talking about verbal interactions today, I'm only going to go into depth about the verbal side of this, but I will also mention the physical side of it as well. So what we do is it's called match, pace, and lead. And I just want to touch on matching today. So we present ourselves to whoever we're dealing with in a way similar to they are. And that way we will connect with them better. And there's a couple of really strong ground rules around matching that you must never, ever break. The first one is that any purposeful matching, in other words, it doesn't happen naturally when you're actually doing it, which you will start doing it from now on, it's got to be done subtly. And you'll hear me talk shortly and give you an example of this, and that is that if it's uncomfortable for you, then you don't do it, okay? Because it will look forced and it will be very hard and it will be unpleasant for yourself and it just won't work. So let's talk about voice for a moment. So from now on, I want you, the next time you're talking to a client, to think about your volume, pace, and tone. Think about those three things initially. So your volume, pace, and tone. So if I pick up the phone and I go, "Good afternoon, Trevor Slater speaking," and somebody on the other end of the phone goes, "Mr. Slater, this is Robert Jones here, and I think I need to talk to you about joining Financial Dispute Resolution Service." Now, I wouldn't go, "Well, it's very good to hear from you," and mirror exactly what they were doing. But I'd certainly come down from "Good afternoon, Trevor Slater speaking" to, "Well, I think we could probably help you do that." So it's a subtle adjustment to the pace. Likewise, if somebody rings up and goes, "Hello, Mr. Slater," and talks really soft, and I'm generally a loudspeaker, I will just bring my volume down a bit and turn it down. Or if somebody's really loud and out there, then I'll increase my volume as well so that I am matching subtly their volume, pace, and tone. It's so, so important. I can't tell you guys how often I see conversations and I mediate between people where they're both talking very differently, and that is the key that unlocks the path to resolution and connection. The other two there, the other one there, the first one there is terminology. We in the financial industry have every single acronym, abbreviation that you can think of to describe something the way that nobody else will understand at times. So just listen to your client and use the words that they're using to describe it. Now, if it's a situation where you have to use a particular term because it's the correct term, then you get permission to say it. So for example, let's say you're using the words "your policy." So your policy, dot, 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 and the client is using the term "my insurance." There's nothing wrong with saying the policy, and you're referring to it as "my insurance," and the policy, and then go from there, because what you're actually doing is asking permission to change the terminology. And if you need to do that, that's absolutely acceptable. You can even say the policy, or as you're calling it, your insurance cover. So that's fine, particularly if you have to use a particular term. But if you don't, then use their term. Matching the words, just one or two here and there that they use, will help you connect. I remember years and years ago, I was in a negotiation, and I'd been in this negotiation with this particular person many, 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 many times. And it was the night, and I'd lost just about every time. I had an office, I lost the office. I had flexible working hours, I lost my flexible working hours. Every negotiation I went into, I lost. The night before, a very, very big negotiation with this particular person, it dawned on me that I was completely negotiating in a different way to that person was, and even to the point that wasn't even thinking about matching and pacing and leading. And that particular person used to have a saying that she used all the time, which was, so that is your position on that point. So at the first opportunity, when it was appropriate in the negotiation the next day, I used that terminology. So that's your position on that. So I changed the words from that's your position on that point to just that's your position on that. So it wasn't exactly mirroring. That's the subtle part. Stopped her quite dead in her tracks and very much started to connect and properly negotiate with me rather than trying to, I guess, bully me. I also was using some other matching techniques at that time and got to a point where she said one of the best things you can ever hear anybody say in a negotiation, and that is that I can't change what's past, but if you've got some ideas about future options, let's talk about them. Perfect. And that gave me the opportunity to be quite successful in the negotiation. Common ground, one of those things that we do all the time. This is what we do naturally, and some people do it really well, and that's why some people connect. So this is the questions around things like, where do you come from? How many kids have you got? What's your salary? Who do you support politically? What's your religion? Really, not all those, not all those. So they're the things we ask about, where do you come from? Really, really strong way to connect. Being an ex-Australian, I often get asked where I come from in Australia. And when I say it's Melbourne, people say, oh, I love Melbourne, I've been there, and all of a sudden we've got a connection and it goes from there. And then my next question is, where do you come from? And if it's somewhere that I've never been to and I don't know, I say, oh, I don't know where that is, tell me about it. And all of a sudden we've got this nice conversation going. A couple of tips of common ground. We'll just go back half a second. One of the great ways is kids as well. How many kids have you got? That sort of thing. So that works as well. A couple of tips of common ground. Please don't say you've been somewhere, and if you haven't, because you will get caught out. So if somebody says, I live at Taupo, and you say, oh, it's great, I was there, it's a beautiful town and lovely place and blah, blah, blah. Somebody might just say to you, oh, do you like the new fountain in the centre of town? And you go, yeah, it's pretty good. And all of a sudden they go, there's no fountain in the centre of town, and you've completely lost any chance of connection. And the other one is just be careful with children. It's a great way to connect, but you need to keep your comments pretty neutral. I remember having a student in a workshop I was running some time ago, and this was a workshop running over half days for about 4 days, I think it was. And we did the matching technique on one of the mornings, and he went back to work. And sure enough, he tried it that afternoon. He came in the next morning and he said, it didn't work. And was really quite upset about it. So I asked him to tell me the story. And he said to me, look, I rang somebody who'd had a complaint with this. I could tell that I wasn't really getting my message through, but I could hear a couple of kids in the background. So I said to her, oh, it sounds like you've got a couple of children. And she said, yes, I do. And he said, how old are they? And she said, they're 2 and 3. And he said, I couldn't believe it, Trevor. I've got a 2 and 3-year-old. I said, well, that sounds great. Why didn't it work? And he said, well, I don't really know. I said, what did you say? And he said, well, when she said they got a 2 and 3-year-old, I said, oh, so have I. The little bastards at that age, aren't they? And which kind of offended her because he was calling the children bastards. So just keep nice, neutral comments about children. People kind of get quite passionate about it. I did say at the beginning of this that because we're talking about verbal delivery here, that I was only going to touch on the voice aspect of matching, but I also want to just quickly touch on the written and also on the physical. You will see if you start now observing people when they're talking and other people are listening, particularly if there's more than one person listening, that if their body language is quite similar to the person that's talking, then that person is being heard. If they're doing the kind of look over the shoulder, where can I go and talk to somebody else, or they're looking around the room, or they've got a completely different body language, they're probably not being heard. Matching with body language has to be incredibly subtle, guys, right? Really, really subtle. So if I'm talking to somebody that has a really nice open stance and is waving their hands around a lot, I'll have an open stance, but I might not be waving my hands. Likewise, if they're standing there with their arms folded, which, by the way, doesn't mean they're not necessarily listening to you, it could be just comfortable with their arms folded, I wouldn't necessarily fold my arms. I would probably have a closed stance by holding my hands in front of me or something similar to that. And I certainly wouldn't mirror it exactly, because if you think about that, they'll probably think you're quite nuts doing that. They fold their arms, unfold their arms, etc., etc. I spend a lot of time these days watching where I'm standing into relation, because I guess I've been practicing this for a while. The actual matching of body language I do without even thinking about it. And every now and again, it quite amazes me when I'm talking and I'm sort of leaning like this. Somebody will be leaning the same. It all blows me away a bit. Um, but I now take the one thing I take a lot of attention about is how close I stand to somebody and whether I'm standing at the same angle, eye contact, etc., etc. So that's important. Now, the written word I just want to quickly touch on is really, really important. And it's important because that's what people are reading. And once you've sent it, whatever it might be, whether it's a letter or an email or a text, you can't get it back. You can't pull it back. So there's a warning there, obviously, to make sure that you think about what you're sending before you send it. If you're dealing with an angry client that sends you an email or a text, just note the time the email came in. If it's after 10 o'clock at night, just cut the person a bit of slack, because could have had a couple of glasses of wine or something like that, will be very, very tired. And if you are going to send that angry email back, I have very much a philosophy of drafting it and leaving it for an hour and coming back to it. And quite often I'll do that, and most times I won't even send the email because it just gets it off your chest. But if you want to talk about matching in written word, the things you look for there, again, is the terminology. You also look for the set out of the page. You look for the font that's being used, the salutations, the greetings, where the date is, and so on and so forth. I can't tolerate very well when somebody sends me something that's justified on the right-hand side. So what I mean by that is when you've got a normal letter, it's all straight down this side, and there's a little icon you can click on Word and make it look like a book. Really bugs me. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But I'm not as bad as Robin, my wife, who's really pedantic about the way letters are written. She comes from an old-fashioned lifestyle, and she very much is into grammar and spelling, to the point that she'll actually correct the grammar of the newsreader on television, to which I say he can't hear, and she says it doesn't matter. But if she sends you a letter, she'll start it off, "Dear Mr. Jones," and she will finish it with "yours sincerely, Robin Slater," in brackets, Mrs. close brackets. Now, I can tell you guys, if you go back to her with "Hi, Robin," she's probably not going to read your letter. And if you go back to her "Dear Ms. Slater," she will be absolutely infuriated with you, because she cannot stand that. But here's the beauty of this stuff, is she's telling you really, really clearly how she wants to be communicated with. She's telling you the font size. She's telling you the color of the type that you're using. She's telling you where to put the date. She's telling you how to greet her, and she's telling you the terminology she wants to use. Now, I know this is a little bit off subject because we're talking about voice and what people hear when you say things, but it's just as important what people will read when you say things. And the matching technique will help build that bridge quite strongly. Um, I've had people say to me, "Trevor, I don't really care how you write to me. You can send it on a postcard as long as I'm getting the information I want, or I'm getting the result I want." And yeah, sure, there are people around like that, and that's great. But there's also lots of people around, like my wife, who will get really upset by a letter that's written the wrong way or can't read it. I have a friend that struggles to read anything under a 12 font size. So you send her a Courier 10 letter, a letter written in Courier 10, she's going to have trouble reading it. And so you're just hindering your connection to communicate. So this is why we do it, to be more effective and efficient in getting your messages understood. It's all about connection. As you can see from that little cartoon there, what you want to say and what they're interested in, you want to try and increase that crossover. And the more you can match with the person, the more you will do so. And here's my final tip before we actually sort of get on to what people hear when you say things. If you are trying to connect with your customer or anybody, spend a lot more time asking questions and listening to their answers than talking about yourself or preparing your next answer. Unfortunately, as human beings, when we're listening to people talking, we have this natural tendency to want to say something better. It's not a bragging thing, it's just a way of communicating. So I went to the movies the other night and I saw blah, blah, blah. It was a great movie. Quite often the action won't be, "Oh, tell me more about the movie. Who was in it? What was it like? Why was it good?" It will be, "Oh, yeah, and I saw," or "Have you seen him in this? It was a great movie." And all of a sudden you're not asking people about them. You're talking about yourself, and so more questions than statements works really, really well. I use it a lot. Okay, let's move on to perspective. So this comes out of a couple of areas, but predominantly a thing called neuro-linguistic programming. And neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, is could be loosely described as a human science, and it was pioneered a long time ago by a couple of American guys, Binder and Grinder, and they had a baseline theory that simply said if we could do everything somebody else could do, we would achieve the same results. So one of their things was that if we did everything that a president of the United States did, in theory, they could become the president of the United States. So their then research started to really branch into some really interesting areas. And one of the areas that it branched into is perspective. They had a theory, and it's been proven to be quite correct, that we do things from one of three positions. And I'm very thankful to them because they only called it simply first, second, and third position. So it's very easy to remember. So I'm going to take you through this, and then I'm going to explain to you why it's important to know it. Before I do, I just want to say that this is not about getting you to change your opinion on something. All it is checking that you've got it right. So what I mean by that is, let's say, and I know you don't, but let's say that you were working in the claims department and you denied a claim. It's very easy to lose perspective of that claim denial. And if it goes off your desk, somebody might look at it and go, what the hell have you done that for? And so that's the same with whatever you do. Do some perspective checking will help you make sure that what leaves your desk or your mouth will be good. So let's talk about it. So first position is, as it says, it's self-orientated. It's all about me. How does this affect me? How do I feel about this? The way I see things. I'm right, you're wrong. It's just no consideration of anybody else's views whatsoever. So if I wanted to put that into a little scenario, if I was a dad with a teenage child who wanted to borrow my car, I'd be saying to him, no, you can't have the car. The last time he brought it back, it was empty with fuel. I've just cleaned it. I put new car seat covers on it. It's got petrol in it. So all I'm doing is thinking totally about myself, not caring anyway about him whatsoever. I'm just very firmly in first position. Interestingly, this is where conflict starts. So people will be in first position. I'm right, you're wrong. Can't you see my point of view, etc., etc. Second position is what I like to call hopping over to the neighbour and having a chat. So climbing over the fence. And you would have heard this. It's like putting yourself in their place. We hear that all the time. People will say, put yourself in my position. Or why don't you think about their position? And that's what this is. Like stepping inside somebody else's skin, funny enough, is a quote from To Kill a Mockingbird. So even way, way back when that book was written, not that long ago, they understood this type of stuff. It's how would I feel if I was in their place? Why are they thinking about that? What is their motivation? The map is not the territory means that everybody's perspective of the world is different to yours, and you just have to accept that. If I lined 20 people up on a busy street and there was a car accident and I interviewed those 20 people, they would all give me slightly different versions of events because their map of the world is not the same as anybody else's. And so you just have to accept that. If I go back to the little example I gave you a couple of minutes ago, if I wanted to go into second position when my son asked to borrow the car, I'd be saying, okay, to myself, why does he want the car? Okay, well, it's safer because he's not on public transport, potentially safer. There's peer pressure because his mates have got cars as well. He's got a girlfriend he wants to impress. It's cheaper because I'm putting the petrol in it. It's more flexible. He doesn't have to catch two buses and a train, etc., etc. So I'm trying to get his point of view. Now, this is really important when we talk a bit later about what people hear when you say certain things, because this is the key to that whole little exercise of thinking about that, is putting yourself in the other person's shoes and thinking about what they will feel or hear or think when you say certain things. And we'll come to that in just a moment. Now, third position is my favorite one, actually, which is what we call the observer position. I often call it the helicopter position. So you're floating above everybody else, trying to think about what somebody that you respect would think if they watched what you were doing. So how would this look to somebody else? What would my boss think? how would this look if it was on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow? Now, I know it's not going to be, but it could be on second or third page, as we've seen with some financial complaints. What would my mum think came out of a workshop? And I know a very astute business person who used to run the whole customer relations for a big bank in Australia. He would have the mum rule in his team. And the mum rule would be, if that was your mum on the phone, how would you be talking to her? That was your mum with the complaint, how would you be talking to her? Beautiful way of moving into into third position is taking a step back. And so we would use this when something wanted to go off our desk. If you ask somebody else to peer review something, that's a third position. If I would go back to the little example I get, if I wanted to go into third position, I'd be saying to myself, if my wife came into the room and listened to what I was saying, what would she be thinking? Would she be going, actually, you're right, Trevor, don't give him the car keys. You really didn't look after the car last time, and we said he couldn't have it for a couple of weeks. Or it would be, don't be such an idiot. Give him the keys. It's safer. It's better, etc., etc. So going into third position is that really nice checking position. So when I deliver this information to the person, if somebody else was watching me do that, what would they be thinking? Would they be thinking, that's a great way of doing it? Or, I wouldn't actually say that. That's not really very good to say at all. So that's third position. This first, second, and third position can be helpful in a lot of circumstances, and it can take a lot of stress out of your life. And I'll give you a little example that happened to me this morning. Not uncommon over the last couple of weeks. We had a couple of little problems with the trains coming into work this morning, and they were a bit late. Not terribly late, but they were a bit late, and sure, it was annoying. I was standing on the platform thinking, well, yeah, the train's going to be late. And poor train driver, he's now going to have to be working extra hard and have less breaks between trains because everybody's going to be behind. The train guards are going to get a bit of stick. And yeah, so I was just quite chilled and thought, well, I'm just going to get the train, so I get to work in one piece. What more do you really need? What if it's half an hour late? Doesn't really matter. One of the persons I was traveling with, who I actually kind of work with as well, is very angry this morning that that's happened. It made me late. I don't understand why the train was late. It's not my fault. So totally in first position. And what that has done has made that person quite stressed this morning and to interact, a little bit touchy maybe, that sort of thing, where personally I got to work safe and sound. That's all I was really worried about. But I went into second and third position to think about it, to think about the other people that were affected rather than just thinking about myself. It can be really, really powerful stuff, guys, really powerful to do that, particularly in a conflict situation, but also for a third position to check the documents leaving a desk going to somebody else. So first position, sorry, just go back. So I'll just go over it again. First position, about you. Second position, putting yourself in their shoes. And third position, using it as a helicopter type checking situation. Okay, let's move on to what we've been talking about and promising to talk about this morning, and that is, what do they hear when I say certain things? So let's have a little talk about this. I'll just go back and reiterate that this came about partly from being asked to try and minimise complaints coming out of a claim area. And so the first one I've put in here is, your claim is denied. Okay, now you'll probably be the messenger to deliver this at times, or your client will ring you up and say, my claim is denied, and you'll confirm and say, yes, your claim is denied. So what's a client hear when that's said? You're probably sitting here going, that my claim's not going to be paid. Actually, they don't. They will think things like this. You think I'm a liar. You don't care about me because you've denied the claim. You're not here to help me and you only want my premiums, and I've been ripped off. So they're the type of things that will come about when a really simple word like your claim is denied. This was the cornerstone of the project that I did for the bank, because that's the letters that they used to send. They used to send this dreadful letter that went on for a very, very, very long time, that gave absolutely no information whatsoever. And then the last bit was a claim is denied. They had actually tried putting your claim is denied at the beginning of the letter, which made it much, much worse. And I remember some years ago working for AMP, and this is what AMP used to do. I remember our first trauma claim was the worst claim denial letter I've ever seen in my life. There was a chap in Western Australia and he'd had a stroke or a heart attack, and his medical records did not confirm the conditions of the policy, something along the lines of enzyme levels or something like that. So rather than going back and explaining that and doing what we do these days, the letter just said, "Dear Mr. Jones, re your trauma claim, it is denied. Yours sincerely, Fred Bloggs, Claims Manager, AMP." And when I started there, my boss actually blew that up and stuck it on the wall and said, "That's as low as we are going to go. We can only get better from there." Because what Mr. Jones would have heard is all these things. You think I'm a liar, you don't care, why did I bother having insurance? Never gets paid, it's typical insurance company, it's typical financial advisors give me advice that's not been any good to me. So that's putting yourself in that third position. So let's think about how we can change that. So what could you say? So here's a better way of reframing things like this. And these are just suggestions. I could have written hundreds of them, and I'm sure you've got some. At this point, we can't complete the claim process. The next one, for the claim to be paid, we need to resolve some issues. I've used that many times. From the claim to be paid, we need to ... I've just put resolve some issues there to finish the sentence. But it might be, for the claim to be paid, we need to get more medical evidence. For the claim to be paid, we need this to happen. And sometimes that won't happen, but it's still better than saying your claim is denied. I'd like to explain the claims process and what they look at. This policy is not able to provide the benefit you currently need. They're still far better than saying your claim is denied, because that's got a whole different inference. The policy is not able to provide the benefit you currently need is much better than saying your claim is denied, because the focus is on the policy, not on the claim, and not on the denial. So have a think about those sort of things. Let's go through a couple of other examples. I like this one. Your premium will be doubled. So we're talking about a proposal stage to come back with 100% loading. Now, I'm sure you don't say your premium will be doubled, but I'm sure sometimes that's the way that you may say it. These are some suggestions of a better way of doing it in just a moment, because this is what the client will think. I'm a liar. I'm too old for insurance. You think I'm sick. They think I'm going to make a dodgy claim. That's why you're changing me more. I've actually had a client say that to me. I need a second opinion, and worse, I need another advisor who does a better job for me. This is the type of thoughts that will be going through your client's head, unless you start thinking about what they hear when you say certain things. Really, really important. A classic example I dealt with yesterday in a mediation that I'm doing at the moment, where one party said, "When you sent me that text, it was obviously sarcastic." The other person said, "It was actually from my heart. It wasn't sarcastic at all." And so the person sending it didn't even think for a moment of what the person would be feeling or hearing when that text went through. And that person actually interpreted it as being sarcastic. It was a big breakthrough in the mediation yesterday. It's a very good example. So what could you say with your premium has been doubled? I'd like to explain how premiums are calculated. Your policy application has been accepted with a premium adjustment. Don't put the word "but" in there. With a premium adjustment, not "but" with a premium adjustment. "But" does terrible things, as does a couple of other words. I've got the cover you need at a good premium price. That's not untrue. Then explain what the price is, and if it's above what you've quoted, then you can put the explanation is. At this point, the insurer has made a premium adjustment. So it's a lot softer words that you can use to explain that the premium is not what you've been quoted. Let's have a look at one more. There's two more actually we've got. They won't cover your bad back. Similar things, or they've excluded your back. Similar sort of reaction. You think I'm a liar? You don't care about me? They only want healthy people so they don't have to pay claims. And what's the point of having an insurance if my back's not covered? And that's the type of things that they will hear. So how can we reframe that? Here's a couple of suggestions. I'd like to explain how underwriters assess applications for cover. Your policy application has been accepted with some suggested changes. Apologies for the typo. I've got the cover you need as long as you're okay with the change to the proposed terms. And I like this last one. At this point, the insurer's made a counteroffer to our proposal. That doesn't say that they're bad or they've done everything wrong. They've just come back with a counteroffer. And the nice thing about that last one is a lot of people will get that, because that's how we deal with a lot of things in negotiation, particularly when buying houses or cars, for instance. So that last one will be a nice, soft way that they'll understand it. So one more, and then I'm going to hand over to you. You need life, disability, and income protection insurance. I love this. I actually did a mock one with a not so good advisor some months ago, and that's exactly what he told me I needed. And what I was thinking is, you just want all my money. You're trying to rip me off. You think I'm stupid. Gee, am I that unhealthy? Or you just want lots of commission or payment. That's what people say when you do those sort of words. A reframe, dead easy. Because you're going to do it for your homework. So I'm going to leave you with that one. I'm sure David and I are going to have a little bit of a chat now about some other things around this that and maybe some questions. So that's your homework. Just go back. How you're going to reframe, you need life, disability, and income protection insurance. That's a little bit of takeaway for you. So the final message, not your homework, the final message is this. Before you say something, stop and think how you'd feel if someone said that to you. And that takes us all the way back to that second position. It's about putting yourself in the person's shoes and thinking about what they're hearing when you're saying what you're going to say. And it flips on its head the belief that you can only be responsible for what you say, not what they understand. Okay. David, do we have any questions, or are we finishing?
No. So I should have raised that at the beginning, actually. So I think most people are familiar with the way we communicate via these webinars. If you do want to raise a question, then you can either use the chat box or the question and answer session on your Zoom control panel. There's a couple of questions, sort of administrative questions that came through earlier on. So if you do have anything you'd like Trevor to answer, then please use those forums. I will be monitoring them. We could actually use them for suggested alternatives for that homework, Trevor. That might be an option that we could use. So if you do have some thoughts about how perhaps you could reframe the you need life, disability, and income protection insurance, post them up on the chat or the question and answer, and we'll read them out. But in the meantime, I mean, there is so much information in that presentation, Trevor. One of the things that came through and made the whole thing incredibly engaging, and I think is relevant to the overall discussion, is the use of storytelling in discussion.
Yeah.
The presentation that you gave today came to life by the stories that you told.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant in the context of the way you communicate with people as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And look, I guess talking about stories, I guess my favourite story about first, second, and third position happened some years ago when my wife was preparing a very big Christmas function, and we had a lot of people coming, lots of family. She'd done lots and lots of work on it, starting months out. She had a running list broken down into 15-minute periods, things like light the Weber barbecue at 4:30 in the morning with my name next to it, which quickly got a line put through it. And my son and his partner were coming, and my daughter and grandchildren and all those sort of things. And about, I guess, 2 weeks out, I was having a beer with my son, adult son, obviously. And he said to me, Christmas. And I'm going, yeah, it's going to be great. He said, we're not coming. And it was really interesting because I went from being quite angry with him to really being quite scared to go home that night and tell him that Jeremy wasn't coming. And so I did. And she was very upset, of course, as you can imagine. And the next day we were doing something for the thing, and she said, he should be here. I can't cope with this. It's just not right. And then she said these lovely words. She looked at me and she said, you proclaim yourself to be a dispute resolution practitioner. So here you go, fix this because I can't cope with it. So I thought, great, really, thanks for that, darling. And so I put my mind to it, and I thought, well, I know my son really well, and there's no point trying to negotiate with him. When he's made his mind up about something, actually trying to get it to change will really cement him in his position. And there's lots of people like that, I'm sure you know. Mm-hmm. So I went into this, I used the first, second, and third position stuff. So I actually sat down and said, okay, what are the reasons that he might not want to come to Christmas? So I put myself in his shoes. And I came up with a whole list of things along the lines of he just needed a break, so heading north and the weather was horrible. He wasn't really terribly well off, so he didn't want to buy Christmas presents for everybody. A whole lot of things, just a real lot of things. He didn't want crowds around at Christmas. He'd been working hard, all that sort of thing. And I sat down with Rob and my wife, and I said, let's just go through these for a moment. And we went through them, and she said, okay, yeah, I guess there could be some reasons there. And I said, so why are you doing the Christmas? And she said, because I want everybody to have a good time. I said, well, Jeremy's going to be having a good time. He's just not going to be here, unfortunately. I said, can you live with that? And she said, yes, I can. Because that's a really nice term to ask. Not, are you happy? But can you live with that? It's a really term we use a lot in dispute resolution. Anyway, we had a great Christmas. She accepted that he had reasons for not being there. And everything went really well. What was really amazing is a few weeks later, when he was back, I had a chat to him and said, why didn't you come to Christmas? And he said, well, I don't really want to tell you. And I said, well, I'm going to hassle you until you do. And he said, look, it's like this. He said, I enjoy having a couple of drinks. I said, yeah, we all do. It's Christmas. And he said, Nan, so that's my mother-in-law, hates me drinking. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, and she always hassles you about it and gets upset and all that sort of thing. He said, I didn't want that to happen. Mum had gone to so much trouble to put together a good Christmas, and I knew that me having a couple of drinks would cast a shadow over it, so I just decided not to be there. So a couple of things came out of that. Firstly, by putting ourselves into second position and not getting angry with him, and I guess staying in first position, and then talking to him because we weren't angry with him, showed that he was actually doing something good for us rather than putting himself in a position of spoiling the day. The really amazing thing was on the list that we put down was doesn't like drinking in front of his grandmother. And so it actually clocked second position, actually clocked the reason 100%. So it worked really well. Everybody had a good time. He actually ran me up on Christmas Day from Fraser Island, sitting in the sun when we were in pouring rain and horrible weather in Melbourne at the time. And I kind of do that all the time. Like I was saying this morning with the train, yeah, it's really annoying that you're going to be 10 minutes or half an hour late. But it's other people that suffer for it as well. And if you kind of try and put yourself in their shoes, particularly the guys trying to provide it, this is why I rarely yell at anybody, even when the plane's late and all that stuff. Yep, somebody's made a mistake, somebody's stuffed up. But you know what? What's the point of yelling at other people when it's really not their fault and they're going to suffer just as much as you? And it's a nice way to keep stress out of your life.
Yeah, I thought sometimes the challenge is just holding your tongue temporarily enough time to actually provide that perspective, isn't it? I think it's one of the issues we face.
Yeah, and you can get that in an advice situation. You can be sitting down with your client saying, using all your skills about giving advice and be really questioned quite strongly by the client and even pushed by the client. And it's really easy to suddenly go grrr and get sort of a bit testy and all that sort of thing, where if you just kind of think, well, why are they saying that? If I was in their shoes, why are they saying that? Okay, well, I obviously perhaps I haven't explained well enough what it's about. So let me go over that again. Or perhaps they're concerned that it's going to cost them a lot of money. Let me think about addressing those sort of things.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do. If you can keep yourself, and mediators do it a lot, keep yourself in second and third position, it really helps in a negotiation, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about negotiation.
Yeah, and it's that point, isn't it? It's the second and third position. It's finding a way to step back from your position before you open your mouth or before you do something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in fact, if you're really good at it, and good mediators, this happens to them. Like I know mediators that will be in mediation for 3, 4, 5 hours, forget to eat, go to the toilet, all sorts of things. And then it finishes and they go back into first position. Oh gosh, I'm really hungry. If you're really good at going in second and third position, you could probably sit with the client for a very long time and have no concerns about even having a glass of water or doing, whatever you want to do. And then you'll suddenly go back into first and go, actually, I feel a bit hungry now, or haven't had anything to drink today. So, you'll see that it starts to work when you feel those things happening too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, nobody's yet given us an alternative to you need life, health, and disability and income protection insurance. So I'll keep talking for a minute. So I'm going to put the challenge out there again. Who wants to give it a go?
So I can give you one idea here. I would never say you need all that. I would say something, and I'm sure guys do this, and they probably know this far better than I do. I mean, when you've done what you need to do, and perhaps this is at the end of the first interview before you go back into your research and prepare your advice, it might be like, it sounds to me, there's a number of areas that you could do with some cover. Simple as that. You haven't said life, disability, income protection, or trauma, or everything, and rattled it off. But it does appear to me that there are some areas that we could provide you with some assurance for your future. And I'm going to go away and do some research around that. And then we'll talk about what ones are important and what ones we should prioritise, and see where we end up from there. Much sort of softer way of saying it. The thing is, though, David, good advisors do this anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It would be really rare that you'd see. I'd hope it would be rare that you'd ever see an advisor going, actually, mate, you need all of it. You need life, disability, income protection, trauma, and while I'm here, I'm going to do your house as well. It's not going to happen, right? It's going to be a lot softer than that. But be careful putting it in your written advice. I've seen it in your written advice. After looking at all your facts, etc., my recommendation is life cover, disability cover, income protection, and trauma insurance. And I've seen that in a written statement of advice, and you kind of go, really, that's kind of not the way to do it.
Yeah.
And no qualification around it, no sort of
no rationale for it.
Yeah, no rationale.
Yeah.
And of course, people read that and go, oh yeah, well, I could have got that online.
Exactly.
Why am I dealing with you?
Yeah, that's right. And the email one's really important. I mean, I think we're all guilty of it at times where we've pushed the send button on an emotional email without stepping back. And I had an interesting example of that fairly recently. We were trying to. My daughter's gone back to school. She's year 10 this year, and she was at the end of last year. She had to choose subjects. So I think she had 3 options, and she was told that 2 of her options she'd been accepted for, but the third one clashed with another subject, and so that she wouldn't be able to get it. And we were only informed of that, the day before she was due to start school, a couple of days before, which my wife had negotiated. I'd basically been in communication with the dean at the time. And when the dean came back and said, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it, you still have to choose from one of the options in stream 3. And at that point, Julia just about lost the plot. And I said, okay, forward the email to me saying that I've got to go into clinic, and can you please communicate with David? So I then Julia was basically going to, she was going to just basically send a really grumpy email back saying this is not good enough. And but what she did was she forwarded it to me, and then I took on the responsibility of the negotiation. And the outcome of the negotiation, it was done all through email, but the outcome of the negotiation was that we got the result we were looking for.
Right.
And so I think that highlights the point that you just wait, give it time, and often you'll come up with a solution that is a much better outcome than you would have done had you gone back to somebody with a grumpy email.
You're absolutely right. But also what you've actually done there is that you've moved it from first position to third position by giving it to somebody else. And even though you're still connected to it, it is really a third position that's been pushed to.
Yes.
So, excellent.
Yeah.
I've got a little red number 1 on the Q&A. Does that mean somebody's asking?
Yeah, so Carol's made a point, which is it's a useful point, actually. Yep. She says, regarding sending hasty emails, does everyone know that you can set your email system up to delay sending in emails after you've pressed the send button by as many minutes as you choose?
Cool.
Everyone should do. No, I didn't know that. I work with technology. She said everyone should do this. It's saved my skim innumerable times.
That's excellent. I'm going to check that.
Yeah, I'm going to check that too.
We have a system here where you can't send it until you've checked the person's name. So you have to check the name. So you can type, so no auto type comes up on our email system. You have to put the name in and then actually go in and click on the name so that you make sure it's a way of not sending it to the wrong person. But that's a much better idea.
Yeah. Because it allows you to get off just by pushing a send, and then that's very cool.
How long you've got delay? It's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right.
So Nick has come up with a suggestion on this. What the client here? She said, "Here's a really great severity-based option that will cover from little things right through to the big things, and ultimately the big nasty." Mm-hmm. There's an option for that.
Nice. That's excellent. Yep. And look, I'm probably speaking to the converted here because you guys do all that. I'm just trying to prompt you to think about it when you do it. In particular, it's like your claim is denied. It's one of the biggest ones when people hear somebody say your claim is denied, all these things go around in their head about being dishonest, a liar, typical insurance company, typical advisors, etc., etc., etc. So and that's one of the hard ones. Or any change, any bad news. And this is the importance of being connected, because, and I didn't kind of mention this at the beginning, but when you use those matching techniques and you connect, you can actually deliver good and bad news, because the person will hear you more and understand more because you're connected. If you're not connected, then it makes it really difficult to get your messages through. And sometimes we have to give messages they don't want to hear as well as good news.
Yeah, but it's how you do it, isn't it? Not what,
it is,
you
yeah.
do. This goes back to this whole topic of the conversation. One final point that I think is an important point you touched on, and that is the words that you use. Sometimes the words that you use, the specific words you. So as an example, I was on at a board meeting at the Financial Advice New Zealand yesterday, and somebody raised a point that we need to be very careful about how we refer to prospective clients or basically the New Zealand public. So too often in our industry and many industries, we use the term consumer, and it tends to lead to a particular response. Whereas a better, if we are talking about making New Zealand, from an advice point of view, making New Zealanders better off, we should use the term New Zealanders rather than consumers when we're talking about.
That's nice.
So because it, as I say, it tends to lend itself to a particular perspective. It's actually something I've done a lot of reading on recently, but that's really, really important. How we phrase something can have a fundamentally different impact on the response from the people you talk to.
It's like the argument between complaint and dispute, same thing, but people will argue until they're blue in the face that it's different. And it's the same. It's all about delivering a constant message, a consistent message. And so if Financial Advice New Zealand is saying one of the things is to make New Zealanders better off, it doesn't say making consumers better off. No. And then you change language to consumer, then the two aren't matching as well. So it's a good point. But you're right. Certain words do invoke certain meaning, and that's why often you have to clarify the words that you're using, the jargon you're using, to make sure people understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, and we're coming towards the end, so if there's any, we'll give it one more minute if there's any further questions. Trevor, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Pleasure.
That was incredibly insightful. For those of you who would like to take advantage of it, there is this webinar is subject or is eligible for 1 hour structured CPD. To be able to take advantage of that, you'll need to complete the reflections survey that will come through tomorrow. I think it comes through in an email 24 hours later. So your feedback is incredibly valuable as usual. We have another webinar coming up. I think it's in April, Trevor. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I think it sounds April.
I'll just need to look at the dates, but we'll put it up on the NZFAA website. And as I say, your feedback is valuable, and hope you all have a very good weekend. Hope it's not too wet, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, David.
Brilliant. Thanks, Trevor.